It was one of those mornings when everything seemed to be going wrong before I even left the house. I had barely slept the night before, my alarm didn't go off as planned, and I was running late for my flight to New York. The kind of morning where the universe seems to conspire against you, and you're already bracing yourself for what's to come. I had been excited about this trip for weeks, a much-needed break from the everyday grind. I'd been living in the city for several years, constantly hustling, working long hours, and pushing myself to be on all the time. A weekend away in New York, with its energy and charm, was exactly what I needed to refresh my mind and soul, but, of course, life had other plans. I arrived at the airport, rushing to check in and hoping the flight wouldn't be delayed. As I was heading to the security checkpoint, I heard the dreaded announcement, "Attention passengers, Flight 205 to New York has been delayed due to technical issues. We will update you shortly with a new departure time." Great! I could feel the frustration building up in my chest. There's something about waiting at the airport that instantly puts you on edge. But I told myself it wasn't the end of the world. After all, I was going to New York for a much-needed break. I could handle a little delay. It wasn't until I reached the luggage claim area that things really started to go sideways. I had already been standing there for a while, scanning the conveyor belt as bags and suitcases passed by. I didn't see mine. No problem. Maybe it was just taking a little longer to come through. But after 15 minutes, I started to get worried. And after 30 minutes, I was downright anxious. Eventually, I made my way to the lost baggage desk, where a woman greeted me with a calm, professional smile. "Can I help you, sir?" "I think my luggage is lost," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It didn't come off the conveyor belt. Can you help me find it?" She nodded and typed some information into her computer. After a few minutes, she turned back to me. "It looks like your bag is still in transit," she said. "It may have been delayed with the rest of the flight. We'll get it to you as soon as we can. If you'd like, we can have it delivered to your hotel later today." I had to admit, I was a little taken aback. I was now in New York without my belongings. No change of clothes, no toiletries, nothing but the clothes on my back. I was irritated, but I tried to stay composed. "Okay, I understand. Thank you for your help." And that's when the real test began. For the next few hours, I found myself in an internal struggle. The initial frustration started to give way to anxiety and irritation. I had been looking forward to this trip, and now it felt like everything was falling apart. I had no clothes, no personal items, and I had just realized that I had no idea what I was going to do. I decided to push through the discomfort and made my way into the city, figuring that once I got to my hotel, I would feel better. Maybe the thought of New York would calm me down. But that didn't happen. The city was as bustling and chaotic as ever, and I found myself feeling more out of place than ever. The bright lights, the honking taxis, the crowds of people rushing by, it was all a blur of noise and confusion. I felt like I didn't belong. When I finally made it to my hotel, I was exhausted. The desk clerk was friendly, but gave me the same response about my lost luggage: "We'll send it over as soon as we get it." I walked up to my room, feeling completely disoriented. The stress of the day was starting to weigh on me, and I was beginning to question why I even bothered to come to New York in the first place. I decided to take a walk to clear my mind. As I left the hotel and headed down the street, I stumbled across a small cafe. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee caught my attention, and despite my frustration, I decided to step inside. The cafe was warm and inviting, with dim lighting and a cozy atmosphere. I ordered a coffee and found a quiet table by the window. For the first time that day, I felt a small sense of relief. The world outside seemed to slow down for a moment, and I could take a breath. That's when something unexpected happened. I was sitting there, scrolling through my phone, when a woman walked in and ordered a cappuccino. She sat down at the table next to mine and, for some reason, glanced over at me. Her eyes caught mine, and I could see that she was smiling slightly. "Looks like we're both having one of those days, hey?" she said with a light laugh. I looked up at her and smiled back, surprised by her sudden friendliness. "Yeah, you could say that. It's been a rough morning. Lost luggage, delayed flights, you name it." "I hear you," she said. "I'm in town for a conference, and my suitcase never made it either. It's like the universe is conspiring against me." I laughed, genuinely amused by the coincidence. We started talking, and it felt like we were two strangers connected by the same strange turn of events. We shared stories about our travels, our jobs, and how we were both dealing with the frustrations of our respective situations. As we talked, I realized that I had been so focused on my own frustrations that I had forgotten the importance of just connecting with another person. We were both in a city that never sleeps, surrounded by millions of strangers, yet for some reason, we had crossed paths and ended up sharing this moment. We spent the next few hours talking, enjoying the warmth of the cafe and each other's company. We didn't solve our problems, but we shared in the experience of being lost in a new place, in the same way that everyone else around us was. By the time I left the cafe, I felt lighter. My luggage still hadn't arrived, but I had learned something important. Sometimes, life throws unexpected challenges your way, but the people you meet along the way can make all the difference. I'd been so focused on the negative aspects of my trip that I had missed the opportunity to just enjoy the experience, even with its setbacks. In the days that followed, I continued my trip through New York with a new perspective. Yes, my luggage was delayed for 2 more days, but I didn't let it ruin my time. I spent the days exploring the city, meeting new people, and appreciating the moments of serendipity that came with traveling, whether it was getting lost on the subway or discovering a hidden gem of a restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. Eventually, my bag was delivered to my hotel, and I was able to finally put on a fresh change of clothes. But it was the lessons I learned during those early, frustrating moments that stayed with me: patience, trust, and the importance of human connection, especially when things don't go as planned. Looking back, I realized that losing my luggage was just a small part of the story. The real journey was learning how to let go, be present in the moment, and find joy even when life doesn't go according to plan. And sometimes, a simple conversation with a stranger in a cafe is all it takes to remind you of that. Second story. I've always been the type of person who takes pride in being meticulous. Whether it was school, my first job, or any other venture I've embarked on, I've always tried to do things with precision and perfection. So when I made a mistake at work that was much bigger than anything I'd ever experienced before, I felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath me. It was an ordinary Wednesday morning when the call came. I was working as a project manager for a mid-sized marketing agency, handling several large accounts for major clients. My day had started off like any other, running through emails, catching up on meetings, and checking in with my team to make sure everything was on track. The project I was overseeing was critical, and I had been under pressure to deliver a marketing strategy for a huge client. I had been in the office for nearly 6 hours when the email came through. I had been reviewing the finalized presentation that we were preparing for a meeting the next day. I had meticulously combed through every detail, making sure there were no typos, no mistakes, and that all the visuals were correct. But I didn't notice something glaringly obvious. I had missed an entire section of the report. The analysis that the client had requested, the heart of the presentation, was nowhere to be found. I panicked. I immediately called my team together and realized that, in the chaos of the last few weeks, I had completely overlooked it. My mind raced as I tried to figure out a way to fix the problem. I knew that we were on a tight deadline, and I was the one responsible for this failure. How could I have missed something so obvious? My heart sank as I prepared to tell my boss, Sarah. Sarah had been the backbone of our department for years. She was tough, smart, and had an uncanny ability to stay calm under pressure. I respected her, but I also feared her. I knew she would hold me accountable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had let everyone down. After taking a few deep breaths, I sent her a message asking to meet. I was on edge the entire walk to her office. I could feel my palms sweating as I tried to prepare my words. I had no idea what she was going to say or how she would react, but I knew I couldn't hide my mistake. I had to own up to it. When I walked into her office, Sarah looked up from her desk and motioned for me to sit. Her face was unreadable, and I couldn't tell if she had already figured out the issue. I immediately started to explain, trying to make sense of my mistake, but the words were coming out in a jumbled mess. Sarah sat back in her chair, listening intently, and then she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Why did you make that mistake?" I paused. "I don't know," I said, my voice cracking. "I've been under a lot of pressure, and I guess I just missed it. I should have double-checked everything. It's completely my fault." She didn't say anything for a moment. I was waiting for the inevitable reprimand, for the disappointment in her eyes, but instead, she looked at me and said something I wasn't expecting. "Everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is how we respond to them. Let's figure out how to fix it." I blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" She smiled slightly. "This isn't the end of the world. You made a mistake, but you're smart. You're resourceful. We'll find a solution." And that was the beginning of my transformation. For the next few hours, Sarah and I worked together to figure out how to salvage the presentation. We got our team involved and worked late into the night, redoing the analysis and tightening up the presentation. Despite the stress, I began to realize that I wasn't alone in this. My team members were incredibly supportive, offering their expertise and helping to patch things up. That night, I learned something I hadn't fully understood before: mistakes were part of the process. They weren't an indication of failure, but rather opportunities for growth. Yes, it was stressful. Yes, it was a wake-up call. But I didn't have to face it alone. The next day, I walked into the meeting with the client. We were all on edge, but our presentation was better than it had been the day before, thanks to the collective effort of my team. It went well. In fact, it went better than I had expected. The client was impressed, and the feedback we received was overwhelmingly positive. Despite the initial panic, everything turned out okay. But the experience changed me. It was the first time I really understood the value of collaboration and of trusting the people around me. I had always been so focused on doing everything myself, on being the one who had all the answers. But that mistake and the way Sarah handled it taught me that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a strength, but that wasn't the only lesson I took away from this experience. Over the following weeks, I found myself developing closer relationships with my team members. We began to trust each other more, to rely on one another's expertise, and to recognize that we were all in this together. It wasn't just about individual success anymore, it was about the success of the whole team. Then, one day, I was sitting in a meeting with one of my colleagues, David, when he said something that really struck me. "You know," he said, "it's easy to think we have to be perfect all the time. But you've got to remember, no one expects that. We just have to show up, be honest, and give our best effort. That's all we can do." David's words stuck with me. It was a simple truth, but it hit me hard. I had been so focused on avoiding mistakes that I had neglected the importance of showing up authentically. I was so concerned with what could go wrong that I had overlooked the opportunities for growth in the mistakes themselves. From that point forward, I began to approach my work differently. I allowed myself to make mistakes. I started asking for help when I needed it and offered help to others when I could. I stopped viewing mistakes as failures, and instead, I saw them as valuable lessons. As my career progressed, I found myself in more leadership roles, guiding new projects and mentoring younger team members. I often thought back to that day when I made that mistake, and I realized that it had been a pivotal moment in my life. It wasn't just the mistake itself that had changed me, it was the way I responded to it and the people I surrounded myself with. By embracing my mistakes, I not only became a better employee, but also a better leader. I learned to trust myself and trust the people around me, and I gained a new perspective on the importance of connection, humility, and growth. What had started as a disastrous mistake turned into a catalyst for a deeper, more meaningful transformation in my career and life. Looking back, I now understand that some of the best things that happen to us come from the unexpected. Sometimes, it's not the triumphs, but the failures that teach us the most valuable lessons. And for me, that one mistake at work changed the entire trajectory of my career and my life. Third story. I always imagined my life would follow a traditional path: go to college, get a degree, find a job, and settle into the routine of adulthood. But at the age of 21, when most of my friends were still figuring out their futures, I made a decision that, in hindsight, completely reshaped my life in ways I never could have imagined. It all started when I was in my junior year of college. I was studying marketing at a reputable university, a field that I thought would open up countless doors for me. I enjoyed the subject matter, but something always felt off. I found myself daydreaming during lectures, wondering if this was truly the path I wanted to follow for the next 30 years of my life. I had a steady group of friends, a good part-time job at a local cafe, and a solid GPA, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on autopilot. One afternoon, while scrolling through LinkedIn, I stumbled upon a post from an alumni who had graduated a few years before me. They were working as a creative director for a tech startup in San Francisco, and the post was about how they had taken a leap of faith and left a stable corporate job to join this small startup. I was fascinated. The freedom, the innovation, the hustle, everything about it sounded so different from the structured life I was living. I spent the next few days researching the company, watching interviews with the founders, and diving deep into what the startup culture was all about. It sounded like everything I wanted, and at the same time, everything I was afraid of. They were looking for marketing interns, and as soon as I saw the listing, I knew that this was my chance. But the problem was, it was in San Francisco, thousands of miles away from my small hometown in the Midwest. I had no family in California. I barely knew anyone who lived there. I had a stable life at university and was on track to graduate in the next year. But deep down, I knew that if I didn't take this chance, I would regret it for the rest of my life. So, I did something that shocked everyone, including myself. I sent an email to the company, asking if I could apply for the internship, explaining that I was willing to take a risk and move across the country for the opportunity. I didn't expect much, but to my surprise, they responded. The next few weeks were a blur of interviews and paperwork. Eventually, I got the call. I had been selected for the internship. I was ecstatic, but also terrified. I had never been to San Francisco, never lived alone, and certainly never worked in a startup. The pay was low, and I knew I'd be scraping by for the first few months. But I didn't care. I was about to do something bold, and in my heart, I felt like this was the beginning of something big. I remember telling my parents. They were supportive, but also worried. They didn't understand why I'd want to leave the comfort of home for an uncertain future. "Are you sure?" my mom asked. "What if it doesn't work out?" I understood their concerns, but I knew I had to take the leap. I was young, and if I didn't do it now, I might never get the chance again. So, I packed my bags, said goodbye to my college friends, and boarded a plane to San Francisco. I'll never forget the first time I saw the Golden Gate Bridge. I had made it. But as I stood there, I was struck by how small I felt in this vast, bustling city. The streets were crowded with people who seemed to have it all figured out, and here I was, an intern at a startup, struggling to find my place in the world. The first few weeks were overwhelming. The pace of the startup was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Everyone was constantly moving, constantly innovating, and constantly hustling. It was a fast-paced, high-energy environment, and I quickly realized that I had a lot to learn. But something else happened too. I thrived. I started taking on more responsibilities, pitching new marketing strategies, and working closely with the team to grow the brand. It wasn't long before I was asked to take on a bigger project, something that would challenge me even further. The company was launching a new product, and they needed someone to handle the digital marketing campaign. They trusted me with it, and I knew that this was my chance to prove myself. I poured everything I had into the campaign. I stayed up late brainstorming ideas, working with the design team, and learning as much as I could about the market. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I doubted myself, but I pushed through. And when the campaign launched, it was a huge success. We hit our targets, gained traction, and the product exceeded expectations. It felt like everything I had worked for was finally paying off. The success of that project opened even more doors for me within the company. I went from being an intern to being a full-time marketing coordinator, and from there, I quickly climbed the ladder. Within 2 years, I was managing my own team and leading marketing initiatives for some of the company's biggest clients. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far I've come. If I had stayed in my small town, playing it safe, I would have never experienced the growth that came from taking that risk. I would have never met the amazing people I worked with, or learned the invaluable lessons that shaped my career. Moving to San Francisco, joining a startup, and immersing myself in the world of innovation was the best decision I ever made. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. There were plenty of sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and times when I questioned if I was good enough. But that's part of the journey. Every failure taught me something new. Every mistake led me to a better understanding of myself and my strengths. And most importantly, I learned to embrace uncertainty. Life is never a straight line, and sometimes, the best things happen when we take that leap of faith and embrace the unknown. Today, I'm still working in the startup world, but now I'm in a position to help others take the risks that changed my life. I mentor young professionals who are just starting out, encouraging them to trust their instincts, take calculated risks, and pursue the opportunities that come their way. I look back at my 21-year-old self, fresh out of college and full of doubt, and I'm proud of the decision I made. Sometimes, life doesn't go according to plan. But that's what makes it interesting. The journey is filled with unexpected twists and turns, and the only way to truly experience it is to step outside your comfort zone, take risks, and embrace the challenges that come your way. For me, the decision at 21 was the best risk I've ever taken, and it's a lesson I carry with me every day.